we might ask ourselves, why is meditation helpful? And I'd like to begin this short meditation with a few words from a Chilean poet who's actually a Nobel Prize winner. His name is Pablo Neruda. And he speaks about, in his poem called Keeping Quiet, what would happen if we would all just stop for 12 seconds, which is really a description of meditation. So maybe we'll just begin. I invite you just to sit comfortably, and you want to have your eyes closed, you're welcome to, and just sitting in a posture that you can feel comfortable and awake. We'll do just like a minute or two. This is a way to become present. But Pablo Neruda writes, if we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps this huge silence might interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us when everything seems to be dead in winter and later proves to be alive. So let's just stop for about 12 seconds. Just be mindful of the body, how you're feeling, being present. So thank you so much. Few moments. Very powerful what he says. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps this huge silence might interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. These are very powerful words. And so this morning I want to speak with you about mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so here's, as you can see, the topics. What is mindfulness? What is mindfulness-based stress reduction? The acronym MBSR. Program standards. How does mindfulness relate to stress reduction? Benefits of MBSR. My experience, I'll share a little bit about how I set up mindfulness-based stress reduction programs in 7 different medical centers. And then we'll maybe have a little bit more of an experience of mindfulness practice and some time for some Q&A. See if I get this good. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is synonymous with awareness. Non-reactive, moment-to-moment awareness. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction, gives kind of an operational definition: the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally, and in the present moment. And when we think about our lives, the only moments that we actually ever really live in is the present moment. Future has not yet come, and the past has already gone by, and so we are putting some emphasis in being present. It certainly doesn't mean, though, not to be practical and plan ahead, otherwise there'll be no food in the refrigerator when you get home. So we can, of course, plan ahead. But mindfulness practice is this practice of learning to be more in the present moment. A friend of mine mentioned once, when practicing mindfulness, that one of her first insights that she got when she began to stop and to become present to the workings of her own mind is how much of the time it was filled with rehearsing about the future and rehashing about the past, missing what's happening in the present moment. So in mindfulness practice, we are learning to become more present to the workings of our own body and our own mind. So what is mindfulness-based stress reduction? It has its underpinnings in Buddhist psychology and mindfulness meditation, stress psychology and physiology, neuroscience, yoga, and other wisdom traditions. MBSR serves anyone living with stress, pain, and illness, as well as wanting for people to want to improve their health and their well-being. People are referred by health professionals, or also they are self-referring. They hear about this from a friend, a family member, and want to self-select into the program. Worldwide, there's over 750 mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. I just want to point to you the founders of mindfulness-based stress reduction. On the right is Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's a molecular biologist, graduated from MIT, and very interesting story. He was a professor in the medical school at University of Massachusetts Medical Center, and he heard a lecture by a Zen priest named Philip Kaplow at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he was introduced to mindfulness practice. And he began to practice mindfulness meditation, as well as in being a professor in the medical school at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And when he went away on an insight meditation retreat, he reflected on how potentially these two worlds could be brought together, the teachings of mindfulness and medicine. And in a moment of inspiration, he said, why not? This can happen. We can bring this into the secular setting of medicine. This is part of mind-body medicine. As a scientist and researcher, he began to do research studies on the efficacy of mindfulness. The early studies were looking at long-term chronic pain patients and found that even after 4 years, there was much more manageable outcomes in working and living with chronic pain. There was also a 3-year follow-up study of people with panic and anxiety disorders that showed that after 3 years, that mindfulness meditation was still very beneficial. Jon Kabat-Zinn's first intern on his right, Saki Santorelli, pictured here as well, is now the executive director from the University of Massachusetts Medical Center at the Center for Mindfulness. Jon Kabat-Zinn has since retired, but travels tirelessly around the world, continuing to teach mindfulness-based stress reduction. There's a picture of University of Massachusetts Medical School and the center. So I want to speak about program standards, just so we understand, because mindfulness-based stress reduction has grown exponentially throughout the world, there is importance to have standards, because this is an evidence-based modality, and so we want to make sure that there is a particular standard that's involved that will define what is mindfulness-based stress reduction. The mindfulness-based stress reduction program standard is an 8-week program to help empower participants to take an active role in the management of their health and wellness. Classes meet once a week for 2.5 hours, and in the 6th week, there's an all-day session. Participants practice mindfulness meditation and mindfulness movements for 45 minutes a day with instructional audio CDs or downloads. There are formal practices of meditation that each participant practices with: the sitting meditation, the body scan, yoga and walking meditation. And then there's the informal practices of mindfulness, of bringing our mindfulness into our day-to-day activities. In addition, many of the classes include some presentational themes, becoming mindful of pleasant or unpleasant events and how it affects one in their body, their mind, their thoughts and emotions. Is presentational themes on stress reactivity versus mindful responding, bringing mindfulness into communication, being mindful of what we take in our day-to-day lives, food, media, relationships, the world. Remember one time one of our students commented that she has trouble sleeping for years. And when she became mindful of what she took in, she all of a sudden realized that every night before she went to bed, she watched the news. And she began to wonder if there was any connection between watching the news, which is not always very pleasant, and not being able to sleep at night, and began to not watch the news and began to discover that her sleep improved greatly. So as we look at MBSR programs worldwide, they're in 80 different countries. And actually, let me see if I can get this. So, okay. So I think somewhere around here is Taiwan, right? So Jimmy and many some others are teaching MBSR. So we can see worldwide it's in just about every continent and growing exponentially. Even when we take a look at the research that's been published in mindfulness meditation in 1980, you can see very little, and now this goes up to year 2013. It's grown exponentially, the amount of research that's published and growing. And so we want to look at how does mindfulness relate to stress reduction, because I think this is a very important question, because you hear this long word, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So we've explained a little bit about what mindfulness is. It's this practice of being present on purpose. But how does it relate to stress reduction? How does becoming mindful and present help with stress reduction? And the link lies between the mind-body connection, how that our thoughts and emotions affect our body. Anybody relate to that? What is stress? So some definitions. Dr. Hans Selye defines stress as the non-specific response of an organism to any pressure or demand. Particularly like Lazarus, where he says, when the demands exceed the resources, the cup runneth over. But I also want to make a distinction between stress and distress, because when I'm speaking about definitions of stress, I'm speaking about distress. Because there's certain types of stresses that can be very beneficial for us. We go to the gym, we work out, we're exercising our cardiovascular system. This is beneficial. Exercise, a number of different things we do can be very beneficial. It's when the stress becomes into distress that we really need to pay attention. Also, biologically, it's very important we are wired to remember where there is danger. If we did not have that wiring, we would not survive. There's a fictitious, very humorous story of Ig and Og. They were both prehistoric humanoids. Ig was very scared of saber-toothed tigers and dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rexes, but Og had no clue whatsoever. So as it turns out, we are all descendants of Ig. We have survived. Og had never survived. So again, this is kind of a fictitious statement, but in our wiring, we are wired to recognize danger, and that also is very helpful. But when we begin to move into a place of distress, overwhelm, we can get ourselves into trouble. I think it's stress. Look at that poor zebra. Oh my gosh. So how does the body respond to stress? The brain, first of all, doesn't distinguish between physical or psychological dangers, and it triggers the release of hormones and neurotransmitters that activate stress reactions. Whether you're giving a public talk to a group of physicians in a hospital at 7:30 in the morning, or being chased by a pack of hungry tigers or wolves, the body has its own reactions. When the brain perceives a threat, many of you understand this, of course, affects our autonomic nervous system, the choice to fight, flight, or freeze. Stress hormones can weaken our immune system, increase the risk of heart disease and stroke and kidney disease, muscle tension, back and neck and shoulder pain, Excess cortisol in the blood interferes with serotonin, contributing to depression, anxiety disorders, as well as being linked to insomnia, obesity, increased sensitivity to pain. And also physicians, they can get stressed out too. Physician burnout in the United States is pervasive, and it's characterized by a loss of emotional and mental and physical energy due to continued job stress. This is from the Annals of Family Medicine. Is there stress in physician life in Taiwan? Anyone's nod their head? Okay. So we also want to understand that mindfulness training can help physicians to become more focused and empathetic and less emotionally exhausted. Why does this happen, this stressful way of things? And so we can say that a lot of the sources of our stress is related to patterns of reactivity, habitual patterns. These often get fueled by negative self-talk, styles of thinking, catastrophizing, exaggerating the negative, discounting the positive, blaming, and of course this can lead to maladaptive coping styles, substance abuse, smoking, workaholism, busyness that can actually lead into physiological breakdown. These reactive patterns are very deeply ingrained with us due to past conditioning, and if we're not mindful, we will continue with these patterns of reactivity. And so this is why mindfulness can play such a strategic role in stress reduction. And there's a very beautiful quote by a psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, who's also an author, concentration camp survivor, Austrian psychiatrist, wrote a number of books. But he says that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose a response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. This is a very significant offering here. Between the stimulus and the response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom. There's so many times, due to our patterns of reactivity, our old conditioning, we do not recognize the spaces between our reactions. There's so much impulsive reactivity to things. This is why if we become aware that life is made up of one moment at a time, potentially we can begin to choose another way. This is very, very important to see that we have choices, that we can begin to respond to the stress in a more constructive way, rather than reacting in a way that is counterproductive, sometimes even destructive. As we know, life is made up of one moment at a time, but sometimes we don't recognize it's made up of one moment at a time because of the trajectory of things. Just like a movie, a film, is made up of one frame at a time and spun together, gives it that illusion of its fluidity, and life, of course, has its own fluidity, but it's made up of one moment at a time. But if we're constantly living into the future or being in the past and all these conditionings, we're missing the present moment, missing the possibility that we can begin to choose another way. There's a very humorous but very insightful teaching poem that speaks to this. It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Patricia Nelson. And so she says in chapter 1, I'm walking down the street and there's a deep hole in the sidewalk and I fall in and I'm helpless. And it takes a long time, but I finally do get out. In chapter 2, I'm walking down that same street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, I fall in again. I see where I am. It's my fault to get out quickly this time. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, I fall in again. It's a habit, you know. This is kind of what I do. So many of us can live in chapter 3 for a long time. But if we become mindful, if we become aware and see that we have a choice and that we can respond differently, In chapter 4, I'm walking down that same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk, and I walk around the hole. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. And so there's the possibility, when we become aware, we can negotiate much more clearly, see where we are, and navigate in a more constructive way. Just like, for example, if all the power went out in this room right now, and we were trying to find the doors to get out, we wouldn't be able to find them. But as soon as the light turns on, there's the door right there. Probably maybe there's something somewhere else, right here. And so with the light, we can see. So mindfulness is in the same way. We turn on the light of awareness, we have more faculties, more with us, that we can choose a more skillful response if we have awareness. If we're conditioned in this old automatic reactivity that's based on this unawareness, these old patterns, we will continue to perpetuate these cycles. This is why, actually I kind of spoke about this, mindful responding. I want to come to the health system feedback loop, which is a very simple equation. So part of this equation goes that when we're unaware, we're disconnected from our experience. When we're disconnected from our experience, we can begin to spin out of balance. So for example, I saw driving here that I understand that that sometimes it can be traffic jams. Fortunately, we had a good drive here today when we got here, but I've heard about traffic in Taipei. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. So sometimes we're driving, and as a physician, you got to get there. You're seeing your first patient at 9 a.m. and you're driving, and there's a traffic jam, and you're not going to get there at 9 a.m. It can be kind of a stressful thing, because of course, if you come late, then every single patient you see gets a half hour late. It's just this whole snowball. And so, unbeknownst to us, if we're not being mindful, right on that highway, we begin to hold the steering wheel so tightly that our knuckles are turning white. It's causing all this musculoskeletal tension in our body. We're beginning to get irritated and very angry and very anxious, and our breathing starts to get elevated and rapid. That's increasing our heart rate and blood pressure and temperature of our body. And before you know it, our body's in a stress reaction. And often in the car, there's not someone sitting next to you pointing a gun to your head, telling you to hold tightly and to breathe rapidly and to bring up your heart rate and blood pressure and so forth. We are doing this to ourselves. We are our own greatest adversary. And so we could be very lost in this reactive cycle due to past conditioning of getting stuck in traffic, trying to get to the hospital on time. So this is something familiar. This has happened before, and I'm getting myself worked up, and I'm getting upset. But then you remember going to this lecture, and this guy's speaking about mindfulness. Wait a minute, turn on the light here. And all of a sudden you become aware, holding tightly, breathing rapidly. And in that moment of awareness, you're becoming connected again. And because of the sense of connection, I'm beginning to loosen the grip in the steering wheel. I see that my breathing is very rapid and regular, and I do a few mindful breaths, breathing in, breathing out. Gradually, my heart rate, blood pressure, the temperature of my body begins to regulate, coming back into balance. How that whole sequence happened was you became aware. That awareness brought you connection. That connection helps serve to bring regulation. If we're unaware, so again, with this little simple equation, when we're unaware, we're disconnected from our experience, and because of that disconnection, we can begin to spin out of balance. But conversely, when we become aware, we become connected, and because of that connection, we can begin to regulate and come back into balance. This is why mindfulness plays such a strategic role in working and managing with stress and challenges of life. It's giving us an opportunity to respond in a much more constructive way. Also, there's been a lot of research with the brain, a mindful brain, charting new neural pathways. Speaks about that the neurons that fire together begin to wire together. There's a lot of research going about through the repetition of mindfulness practices activates certain areas within the brain that are more connected to areas of resiliency. This is a picture in, let's see, this gentleman here is Dr. Richard Davison. This is at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, in a laboratory that is called Effective Neuroscience, where he's been doing a lot of MRIs with meditators. This meditator here is actually a former physicist, Mathieu Ricard, who is now a Tibetan monk. And so they're doing a lot of research on neuroplasticity, the effect of meditation on the brain. So the benefits of mindfulness practice: decreases reported in chronic pain, anxiety, and depression, improved concentration and creativity, improved immune system functioning, greater self-acceptance, increased capacity and resilience to meet challenges. It's a cost-effective measure. When we find that people are able to, for example, that woman that discovered that the news affected her insomnia, then she would actually decrease her sleep medication. Or someone that's able to manage much better their blood pressure through stress-relieving practices rather than taking a medication. So at times there's reported decreases of visits to the hospitals, medical offices, as well as potential decreases in medication. So we can see that mindfulness MBSR in the service of human flourishing to help support the relief of suffering and building health, resilience, and well-being. So I'll speak a little bit about how I've set up an MBSR program in hospital. And I was very fortunate because I, at the beginning, was not connected with the hospital, but a colleague, friend of mine, his name was Dr. Howard Noodleman, who's a physician at El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California, who unfortunately had a second reoccurrence of a melanoma, of a cancer. And he was also a mindfulness meditator and wanted to develop a program at his hospital, and recognized that he was not going to live long enough to make this happen. And he knew of me teaching a similar program in Santa Cruz, California, and invited me to come to El Camino. And I met with Dr. Noodleman, and he asked me to help champion the program. After his death, I met with a number of his colleagues, different surgeons, the medical director of the medical center, some social workers, a few other physicians, and they formed what was called the Medical Advisory Committee. And they actually helped to champion the program in the hospital to help it happen. We gave a number of different talks, grand rounds, as well as they decided, let's take the first class and let's actually have an experience of what this mindfulness practice is. They had heard about it from Dr. Noodleman, but didn't really experience it firsthand. And so my very first class was with a group of physicians, some of their spouses, some of their colleagues, and they saw firsthand its experience. And so they began to be my champion, if you will, to bring the program into the hospital. And one of the things that we decided right away that would be very helpful is to house the program in the Department of Health Education, that this became a delivery of health education. People were not considered, and are still not considered, to be patients, nor are they considered to be clients in the psychotherapy realm. So we can say that MBSR is not a psychotherapy, it is part of health education. And actually, the sense of health education, being a student, is a very empowering type of word, that we can be, as a student, I can begin to participate in my health and my well-being in a very active way. We also offer a free introductory or orientation session that's 2 hours before each 8-week program, so that we can really inform people about what is an MBSR program, what actually happens in a class, and then have people can begin to self-select into the class. It's very wonderful on our very first class that the people that are there have been through the orientation and they want to be in the class. And that's reflected over 23 years at El Camino Hospital offering mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. I've actually offered 280 8-week programs that the average completion rate is nearly 90%. It's 89% of the people that go through our programs complete them. That's based on completing at least around 3/4 of the class. And I really think that's very much attributed to these free orientation sessions, that people understand what they're getting into and then self-select in. Of course, we have a large referral base of health professionals as well as people that are self-refer themselves into the program. They hear about this program from their friends that took the class or family members or work colleagues. Of course, marketing is the very important word. I don't know if there was a movie in the United States called Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, and it's this story about somehow they built this big, huge stadium out in the middle of a cornfield, and they have this expression, if you build the stadium, they will come. But I will tell you the truth, if no one knows that the stadium is there, no one will come. And so the sense of marketing, or the sense of bringing the word out to health professionals, to others, to let people know about these programs so that they can then refer them, is very important. So offering, again, like grand rounds, in-services, different support groups, educating people about the benefits of mindfulness meditation. Of course, also being able to offer continuing education units. Most health professionals need to have a certain amount of medical education units in order to keep their licenses going, whether you're a physician, a nurse, a psychotherapist. So being able to offer continuing education is very important. And as far as the financial setup, and it may be very different in Taiwan, but in the United States, I have the opportunity to actually be what's called an independent contractor. I contract with the hospital providing these programs. I have my own business. It's called Awareness and Relaxation Training. I am not an employee of the hospital. I'm an independent contractor contracting with the hospital. And I provide the services of mindfulness-based stress reduction to anyone living with stress, pain, and illness. And this is an outpatient program. It's not exclusively working with people that are in the hospital beds dealing with the illness, but this out in the community. People living with different stresses, pains, and illness out in the community come to the hospital into this health education class and enroll into the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. As an independent contractor, generally we give a certain percentage to the hospital. Average is about 20%. And in return, the hospital provides some marketing to educate, have flyers, information, website about the program, as well as providing, of course, a room, a space to hold the class, and maybe printing out handouts and so forth, a designated telephone for communication with people that inquire about it and so forth. So again, I'm not sure how the system is set up here, but this is actually a very good way for a hospital to have a chance to not lose a lot of money, if you will, because they're not dependent on giving that person a salary. They only get paid if people come to their classes, and the hospital gets a certain percentage of what's brought in. So maybe, this is from Lena Horne, I'll just say, it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way that you carry it. So I think with this, I'll take a pause, and what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes and introduce you to some sitting meditation, and then we'll have a little time to have some questions. And if you first like, since we've been sitting here for about 45 minutes, if any of you would like to just stand up and stretch your body for a minute, you're welcome to. Finding a position where you can feel comfortable and alert. And so just taking a few moments to bring your awareness to your breathing process. And just breathing normally and naturally and becoming aware of the breath as you breathe in. And being aware of the breath as you're breathing out. So very simple, yet not so easy, because one might discover the mind likes to wander off into what's going to be happening next, what happened before. So when you recognize that you've wandered off, acknowledge where you went, and let's just come back, breathing in and knowing you're breathing in as you're breathing in, and breathing out and knowing that you're breathing out as you're breathing out. And perhaps it's helpful to find that place in the body where you feel your breath to be prominent. It could be in the inner nostrils, the tip of the nose, the upper lip, or perhaps you feel the breath more prominently in your body, in the chest or the belly or other places. So finding that place where you feel the breath to be prominent and distinct. And just for right now, try to stay in the present moment, taking our lives one inhalation and one exhalation at a time. No other place to go and nothing else to do. And for these moments, no one you even have to be. Breathing in and breathing out. And just to say, it's very normal that at times your mind will wander off into the future and the past. Once you recognize this, just acknowledge the wanderings of where you went, and then returning back to the breath. And this may happen again and again. May you practice very kindly, very patiently. Let this practice be one of developing a sense of friendliness with ourselves in the practice, not a type of a way that is harsh, that is critical, that is judgmental. Let this be held with great kindness, breathing in and breathing out. Now gently shifting from the breath, and just sensing into the body, different sensations, the contact or the touch points of the body sitting in the chair, different sensations, tinglings, itches, aches, warmth, coolness, dryness, moisture, just becoming mindful of this field of the body, sensations, and just acknowledging what's present. Sensations in the body. And as you're feeling into the body, you can just gently scan it from head to toes, the fingertips, just being aware of any sensations and acknowledging this is what's present. Just like a weatherman or a meteorologist just is reporting the weather, just acknowledging the different weather systems within the body. And of course, if it brings up any thoughts and emotions, equally just acknowledge them, being present. Now just gently shifting and bringing awareness into the ears and just listening to the different sounds, the ventilation system, different sounds in the room. Perhaps as your concentration deepens, you may hear inside sounds in the body, ringings in the ears, pulses, heartbeat. Being mindful of different sounds as they come and go. Hearing meditation. And now just gently returning back to the breath from where we began, just being mindful of breathing in and breathing out. And again from Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet, if we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps this huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us when everything seems to be dead and winter and later proves to be alive. So thank you for this time to be present to your own body and mind and heart, and beginning to wiggle the fingers and toes and just opening the eyes and just being fully present here and now, alive, awake, and present. So thank you very much. And I would love to open up if there's any comments. Maybe at first, even about the meditation, did anybody's mind wander away from the breath? Am I the only one? Anyone else's mind wander away? Do you know where your mind is? This is one of the first insights that we get when we practice mindfulness meditation, is how much of the time that we're not that present, thinking ahead about the future, worrying about the past. And actually, when you think about it, you might be worrying about the future, like what's going to be happening later today, the caseload you're going to be working with, and you already perhaps are beginning to get tight in your jaw muscle, and you're beginning to get constricted, your mind's getting a little irritated potentially or not. So we begin to understand the mind-body connection, how these thoughts and emotions affect the body. Maybe the mind wandered off into something, and my body is already being affected by these future thoughts. So I'm curious if anyone has any questions or comments about their experience with this practice, or opening it up to anything that I just shared in this talk. Don't be shy. Please.
So I have two questions. The one is, we're trying to promote mindfulness practice for professions or doctors or nurse. But one question is that every time we do the mindfulness practice, they fall asleep. So it's the same in your class, or how would you do that when you face this situation? And the other one is our patients, or especially cancer patients, they're always in suffering. So I mean, is mindfulness practice suitable for emergency situation? For example, the sudden pain, cancer pain. So sometimes it's burst, the pain burst. So is that work suitable for mindfulness practice?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's thank you so much for the questions. And just out of curiosity, did anybody feel sleepy just when we did that short practice? If you'd be willing to admit it, raise your hand. Okay, so there's a few, yeah. And just to normalize, this is very, very common when we first begin to practice mindfulness. And just to say, in our second class of an MBSR program, of course, in the first week, we give people the audio CDs, and then they come back to the second class, and we ask them, what was your experience of doing the practice during the week? And two things come up almost all the time. One is, I can't believe how much my mind is wandering around into the future and the past. So we want to help normalize that. Yes, that's true. And the second is, I'm falling asleep all the time. And so sleep, this is a very common thing that happens when we begin practicing mindfulness for many of us in our busy lives. And often the case is that we're doing too much, and meditation is this radical act that we are actually stopping intentionally on purpose, begin to become aware of the body and mind, and the body actually begins to reveal to you how tired it is. We don't even know sometimes how tired we are until we stop. Many years ago, when human beings were much more in touch with their circadian or biorhythms, we would have the art of siesta. We would be going to sleep when the sun goes down and waking up when the sun comes up. But because of our life of busyness, we at times can lose touch of the needs of the body. And so it's no coincidence that when we begin to meditate, the next thing you hear is the end of the meditation bell going off to wake you up. And so sometimes we say to people, if you maybe this is important information, maybe you should actually begin to do less and sleep more. But we also can do things to counteract the sleep, such as we can meditate with our eyes open, we can stand up rather than sit down, we can imagine we're sitting by the edge of a 10,000-foot cliff, and if we fall asleep, we'll fall over. But also we can say, if you're really tired, sleep and be happy, and then wake up and do the meditation. And we also want to sometimes ask ourselves, sometimes we have so much inner turmoil going on in our lives that is so hard to bear and be with these feelings that we just turn off and go numb and go to sleep. And so I think it's always a helpful question to ask, is there something that I'm really not wanting to feel right now? I'd rather just be asleep. So there's ways that we can begin to work with it by, again, opening the eyes, standing up, trying to do wash your face with cold water, but maybe actually what a person needs to do is sleep more. There's an old story from a Buddhist teaching story of two monks, young monks. One was really macho, really felt you have to meditate hard. The other one just tried to be balanced. And one day the macho monk found the balanced monk sleeping, got very angry, and went and told the teacher, my monk, the friend there, he's sleeping and he should be meditating, and what should I do? And then the teacher gave the monk that complained a blanket and said, put it on the monk that's sleeping, let that monk sleep well and be kind. So we can train with kindness, or we can train harshly. There's a wisdom to train kindly. It doesn't mean not giving effort, but kindness is very important. There's an old teaching story too. We have a dog, right? We want to train the dog to sit, to lie down, to stay. You can train it very rigidly. It will learn those commands, but it will also be at times neurotic and confused. You could also train another dog with kindness. It will also learn to stay, sit, but it will become confident and flexible. And so we find there's a great wisdom in training with kindness. Kindness doesn't mean laziness, but kindness means caring for ourselves. So sometimes if we're falling asleep a lot, we may need to care for ourselves. Now, in regards to pain, and I'm realizing that I'll probably have to end here because it's 8:30, want to honor our time. This is a longer question, so I'll just try to be brief. That first of all, in working with pain, there's acute pain and chronic pain, and sometimes acute pain needs medical attention right away. We need to get some medicine and do what needs to be done. But sometimes the chronic pain, maybe there's something we also can work with our mind. But sometimes the way that we hold our bodies when we're in a lot of pain can actually exacerbate more pain. Maybe my pain is in my belly, but I'm grinding my teeth down, and I'm having all this shoulder and musculoskeletal tension. Because some people will ask me, why would I want to bring awareness into my body when I'm in pain? I don't want to have pain. I don't want to have anything to do with pain. But we might discover that by actually bringing awareness into the body, I discover I'm grinding my teeth and my jaw is hurting. I can begin to soften my jaw joints. If I see that my shoulders are up high, I can begin to lower them down. I'm beginning to develop a relationship with my pain to get softer around it using my mind. Rather than getting tighter, I'm beginning to try to get softer around the pain. There's lessening the constriction and the tightness that creates a vicious cycle of the pain and getting tighter and getting fear and getting more pain and the vicious cycle. Maybe I can begin to interrupt that cycle by getting softer around the pain. But we want to also, the wise use of medications. Again, if it's something acute, maybe we need to have that taken care of, but maybe there's more chronic things I can begin to work with. The second point that I think is very important in working with pain, particularly chronic, more long-term pain, is working with the emotions that come up. Often emotionally, sadness, anger, fear, confusion, shame, and can I begin to actually acknowledge these emotions that I'm feeling? So potentially we recognize there is the physical pain, but I have a way that I can begin to work with the suffering that pain is giving to me. I can begin to work with the sadness, the anger, the fear, the anxiety, the shame. I can begin to acknowledge these feelings. Rather than putting my energy into fighting them, I'm beginning to let them run their course. That perhaps I can begin to come into terms with the way things are with greater wisdom and greater compassion. One last thing that I'll say about pain is that what really exacerbates pain is catastrophizing. How's the pain going to be later? And I'll give you just a short personal story that one time I was having so much pain, I went to my doctor. I was having a pinched nerve, and he said to me, Bob, you have a radiculopathy. And I told him that's ridiculous, but that's what I had, a radiculopathy. And my pain would get so bad at times, I would have this fantasy that I would go out to my woodshed and get a chainsaw, and I'd cut off my arm. That's not a good fantasy to be having. But I began to notice as I practiced mindfulness that fantasy would always come when I was thinking about the future. How's this going to be later, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, 5 years from now, the rest of my life? When the pain was like that, it became unbearable. And so then I began to realize, wait a minute, mindfulness is this practice of coming back into the moment, living my life one moment at a time. And then I discovered that I could live with that pain one moment at a time, but not a whole lifetime ahead. And so then I began to recognize that let me just be with this pain this present moment, and if I'm alive in the next moment, I'll deal with this pain when I get there. That was very, very helpful. Breaking that ruminative cycle of catastrophizing that exacerbates and makes the pain much worse. So listen, you've been very patient with me. I've gone over 5 minutes. I'm sorry. I might actually cause some stress for you, knowing with what you have to do later today. I want to deeply thank you for all of the work that you're doing. You know, you're all doctors, you're all health professionals. You are serving people with suffering and with pain, and this is the noblest of works, giving your life to help serve others in pain. And I just really honor you. Thank you very much for your time.
We also thank you very much for Dr. Paul for his nice presentation and the lecture. Let us learn more about the mindfulness. So we invite our superintendent to present a thanks praise to Dr. Paul.好，我们今天的会就到这里，谢谢大家，谢谢。对不起，业务要宣导。
我今年打了有没有效？没有效，不 A 有效，前面有效。我也是2个流感，我都会这样，就我的病人流感，对。
There's a hard agent to specify for the things that we have seen actually in years 40%. We don't know exactly what caused that. Something the combination of limitations in class that an average of 23 years, an average you know, in mindfulness practice, not necessarily sometimes some of the effects of the practice feel relaxed. That's not the important important is really be the insight into suffering, its causes, or insight and understanding into places that I'm caught, that I'm stuck, that I'm not seeking. So it's a practice of coming to get deeper, understand what is driving our suffering and pain. Rather than being a relaxation agent, it's working on more developing insight and understanding into our own pain. Because that understanding will get us more. But so this is why we call it an insight meditation. It's not about relaxation, it's about getting more insight, but it will also be another relaxation.
I feel like it's already in a that stage, then this practice is less useful.
Well, if you're ill, you may be dealing with fears of death, separation, loss from people, your own inability to not be able to do what you could do before. And so the practice of mindfulness is helping you to begin, how do I begin to make peace with myself, and that my arm is no longer working because I've had a stroke, or I'm dying of a cancer, or whatever. Like, how do I begin to use this practice to make peace with my life, to be able to say goodbye, to be able to meet life and even death with an open heart. So it's going to work in many different ways. Thank you. Very, very nice to meet you. Thank you for your question.
We begin to acknowledge
MES for our staff. How do we measure the outcomes? Usually for patients, we they find the voice so loud. But it's not our outcome for our staff.
That would be fabulous to be able to work with staff again. When I first began at the hospital, community hospital, we did it with the physicians and their spouses and social workers, and that was my first class. And then they understood it now from the inside. It wasn't just in a book. They understood the practice from the inside on how they themselves could be able to meet stress and the challenges of their life in a better way. And then from that inside understanding, they could really help to foster it.
Sure, but the staff get the benefit, but we still cannot measure the outcome.
Well, I mean, you can develop some types of research tools to be able to work with that. One that we use is called the medical symptom checklist. It's a list of about 200 different symptoms, physical symptoms and emotional symptoms, and we'll have people check off at the beginning how many different symptoms are you experiencing right now. Then 2 months later, we'll retake the same test and determine whether there's been any reported decrease of symptoms. We use this at El Camino Hospital for the last 24 years, and we can actually predict that there'll be 40% decrease of reported symptoms. So, but you could develop with your psychologist some type of a pre and a post measure to determine what the efficacy of this. And then you also could do something 3 months out and see longitudinally if there's benefits.
But it's very time consuming to run the whole course.
Yeah, so maybe you don't have to just go and do the practice. to make it help a little bit.
In our daily practice, so many patients complain insomnia. So I suppose the mindfulness may be very beneficial to them. Yeah, because the stress is more in the elder patient.
Yeah, I think insomnia, stress, pain, anxiety, dealing with disability. I mean, with so many things.
Right. Because so many patients in our hospital or in our country, they always take the hypnotics to release his.
Yeah, and we'll say in mindful space, seriously, we're not like against, like sometimes the use of medication is just what's important, but can we also optimize the use of our mind? And both, so the best of both sides of the medicine.
Okay.
So Professor Song is the director of
Medical education.
Thank you for your
Very nice to meet you.
I just slept for a while.
That's a meditation.
How about
Take a good.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
3, 2, 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay to practice mindfulness in the working hours.
你俾大家講起啦嚇，大家講埋。